What's up, guys? Mason the Rock Henderson here, and this is a series of unfortunate events, Season 1, Episode 8, The Miserable Mill, Part 2, Season Finale. And, yeah, kind of felt like the season finale, just the way they set it all up. A lot of it started to make sense. Now, I do want to say it did feel very, very short. 8 episodes is not a very long season, especially considering there was no, hour and a half long episode. The first episode was not especially long or anything like that. They were all 45-minute episodes, which is pretty much most shows nowadays, and only 8 episodes. So I'm a little disappointed by that, just because I want to see more. I love this first season so much. I do want to see more. So hopefully going forward into season 2, I hope this show did well. The reviews on IMDb are fairly good, 8.0 or higher for all of them. So I don't know how many people watched it though, and I don't know what the reception is generally. But I'm hoping it did well enough to warrant a season 2, because I love what they're doing with it right now. They're doing such a good job, and I just want to see this continue. I want to see season 2 be even longer, more books involved. I want to see it give them more time to develop, because so far they're doing a really, really good job with it. So, but like I said, this did kind of feel like the season finale, because throughout the entire season, we were following the Baudelaires, but on the outside was Will Arnett and Kobe Smulders as the Quagmire parents, which we thought were the Baudelaire parents. So after that reveal last episode, I kind of started thinking, wait, why were they involved again? And then it hit me. The next book is The Austere Academy. And so whenever they start pulling into the Prufrock Preparatory School, if that's how you say it, but they head in there, and all of a sudden Lemmy Snicket starts talking about, sometimes there are good things to take away, and he starts talking about a similar outcome for certain people, and the camera starts panning around to the other side of the bench that the Baudelaires are sitting on. I'm like, that's why, because we're showing how the Quagmires got here. So we followed their parents. They showed us their parents a little early on, because they're trying to pull the whole plot twist where we think it's the Baudelaires' parents. But then it ended with, we see the Quagmire's house go up in flames, because that's how they ended up here. That's how they end up in kind of the same boat as the Baudelaires. As I was thinking about it, though, I do remember Quigley and I do remember Isadora. I think it's Isadora. I remember Quigley because that's just such a interesting name. Isadora, something like that, or Isadola. Either way, I do remember the both of them, but I never remembered a third sibling. And they had, whenever the parents come in, there was Duncan, Isadora, and Quigley. So I was like, wait, was there a third sibling? And so whenever the fire happens, I'm like, wait, maybe there was a third sibling, and this is what happened. Because sure enough, there's only 2 of them at the end of it, that's sitting on the other side of the bench. So I like the fact that we got to kind of see how the Quagmires got here as well. So now we can start to build that friendship between the Baudelaires and the Quagmires next season. All of it was just such a good setup. All the stuff in the... We'll talk about the mill first before we get to the end. So we start off, of course, Klaus has just been hypnotized at the end of the last episode, and he goes into work. The hook-handed man is calling out instructions and tells him to work faster, and so he's just kind of going crazy on this little stamping mechanism that stamps down the Lucky Smells lumber mill onto the planks of wood. And so Phil's there, and then all of a sudden, things just started getting speed up a little too fast, and Phil falls on top of it and stamp right on top of his leg. Yeah, I was like, wow, that's very interesting. One of the things that was so good about this, though, is after that happens, of course he goes, ah! And you see Lemmy Snicket talking about, there was an accident, but there were actually 2 accidents. And, of course, the other accident is going to be the doctor. That is, you knew if you read the books before. But anyway, but all of a sudden, we go back, and he's just sitting there, he's kind of like, oh, ah, yeah, oh. And then they, lift it up off his leg, Violet figures out how to operate the machinery. Lifts it up off his leg, and he's just like, guys, now I only have to do half manicures or pedicures. Just calling a reference back to what Lemmy Snicket said in the last episode. An optimist is somebody who, if they get their hand trapped in an alligator, they say, well, at least I only have to do half manicures now. Some of the connection in the jokes like that, very clever how they did it. There was, I can't remember what it was that Sonny said, but they in the sixth episode in the Wide Window when they're talking about Aunt Josephine being dead, and Count Olaf's like Josephine Schmosephine, or he said that whenever the kids were like, what about her? And Lemony Snicket started talking about whenever you want to express disinterest in something, you put schma in front of the word to make it sound like you don't care. And so at the beginning of this episode, they're talking to Count Olaf. I can't remember what Sonny said, but she said something along those lines, and made a joke, another reference back to that. So I love how they started tying in jokes near the end. Another reason why I want a season 2, because I'd love to see what other types of jokes they can connect. How many times we're going to see the schma reference thrown in, but all of it just good setup. The accident happens with Klaus, and so Shirley has already said, I'll take the orphans. Sir's like, okay, well, since that accident happened, there's another one. I know exactly where to send you. They end up, Olaf and Orwell managed to hypnotize Charles to convince Sir to give the orphans away to Shirley. But ultimately, this is all leading to there's one final fatal accident that needs to happen for Sir to say, okay, giving away the orphans to Shirley. And so we see Violet and Klaus are trying to figure out what word to use to wake everybody up from their hypnosis, because they realize that all the lumber mill workers are being hypnotized, which I realized it by the end of the last episode whenever they started saying, when they said all that thing in unison, like lucky smells lumber mills is our life and we're here to stay. And then Klaus said it at some point, and I'm like, okay, so they're hypnotized too. But they're trying to figure out what it is, but they fall asleep while looking. So in comes a hook-handed man, hypnotizes Klaus again with the phrase lucky. So he stands up, goes in. They have Charles wrapped around a log, hypnotized, so he doesn't know what's going on, and is sending him down towards the buzzsaw, which I do kind of remember this scene from the book just a little bit. So Olaf and the hook-handed man are in there. Violet realizes something is wrong, goes in to help, and so she gets there and is trying to figure out what to do. Hook-handed man has her. Olaf is just sitting there telling Klaus to make it go faster, but then all of a sudden the hook-handed man slips up because he says fire. And so Charles wakes up from his hypnosis, and that's whenever Violet realizes, oh, the word is fire. And so she gets on the intercom to say fire, and that's when Lemony Snicket starts talking about, it's never appropriate to shout fire in a crowded building. And he starts talking about, maybe it is whenever you need to create chaos to escape, and apparently he's escaping from somebody right at that moment. But all of a sudden, he starts talking about, keeping people from saying the word fire, and that's why they weren't talking about the fire that happened, that the Baudelaires caused. And all of a sudden, it hit me just how clever, again, this whole plot line was. The whole, the Baudelaires, they're the one that caused the fire, they're the arsonists and all that stuff. It was like, well, why make them believe that? What's the point? It's not like they knew the Baudelaires were going to come there, so why hypnotize them to think that was the Baudelaires' fault? Why hypnotize them to think that that's something that they're not supposed to really... It's because she didn't want them talking about it, because if they said the word fire, it would wake them up from their hypnosis. And so that's why Sir redacted everything about the fire. They don't talk about the fire anymore. Just Baudelaires are arsonists, that's all you need to know. It's very clever. And once again, just another clever plot point that I didn't really expect, and all of a sudden it makes sense now. So, yeah, all of that happens. Violet manages to get everybody out from the hypnosis. She realizes at one point inordinate is the word because Orwell was about to say it, or Olaf. Can't remember. One of those two was about to say it and then cut themselves off. And then Violet remembered, oh wait, I said it, which I still think was bullcrap, but then she remembered Sir came in and said inordinate, which for him makes sense because it seems like a word he would use, just his personality. And so she's like, oh, that must be the word. So then she breaks him out of his hypnosis, but we see Dr. Orwell has Sunny, and she's threatening to toss her into the fire behind her. But then the people break down the doors and they start charging at her, and she's like, oh no, falls back in the fire, tosses Sonny up in the air. Violet catches Sonny, and that's the end of Dr. Orwell. So, not quite falling into a buzzsaw blade, but still pretty gruesome when you think about it. Just fell into the fire and dead. But it does make me wonder because apparently they got her body out of the furnace, and Mr. Poe's wife was there to take pictures. So it makes me wonder, like, how come they didn't talk about that accident? Or I don't know. It seems strange to me because Lemmy Snicket was talking like her body was never found, but they clearly had her body draped under a sheet. So it seemed weird to me that it was like, wait a minute, but then they do know about the other accident. Either that or Mr. Poe's wife completely like screwed up the article and didn't talk about it like it was an accident. But we see Sir says, Sir leaves because apparently all the people were angry with him because of, now they're not hypnotized anymore, so now they're not happy with their job. So he leaves, so Charles is going to look for him, brings out a piece of paper that describes the fire, describes what happens, gives it to the Baudelaires so they can find out what their parents did, and they come to realize that the Baudelaires were responsible for helping people get back on their feet after the fire, which I kind of figured is what it was going to say. But I was hoping maybe there'd be a little bit extra that would maybe add a bit to the story. No, that was it. It was pretty much exactly what you'd expect. But now they're kind of on a little bit more of a positive note because they're like, oh, our parents were heroes. They weren't arsonists, so we figured this out. Just as Mr. Poe says, oh, I'm taking you to boarding school. So, and of course at this point, like I said, I knew The Austere Academy is the next book, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm like, please tell me they're going to leave off in the boarding school. And they do. And that's brilliant to me. Just like in The Wide Window, Part 1, whenever I was thinking about it, I was like, the perfect place to leave off would be, and Josephine has just jumped out the window, so they say, and she's left the note. That would be the perfect place to leave off for the second episode. That's where they left off. And just like with this, I'm thinking the best place for this to leave off, because it's the end of the season, because they want to build towards season 2, the best place to leave off would be them getting to the boarding school. That's exactly where they leave off. They add a little bit extra, which was really awesome, but I'll talk about that in a second. But that's one of the great things about the show is that they know how to pace their episodes. They know how to show certain things at the right pace, and then they end it on the right time. I mean, honestly, ending it where they did last episode was really good. You end it with Shirley and Dr. Orwell have now shown up and have revealed themselves to Violet because Klaus was being hypnotized, so he didn't know what was going on. And ending it right there is it's a good place to end it. It's a good place to leave off. This is another perfect place to leave off, and I think that's been one of the best things about this season is just seeing them end at certain points. It felt like the right time. It felt like, okay, this is the right time to end off, and that's when they do. So really well done there. But like I said, it's not quite over right at the boarding school. So like I said, Mr. Poe's in there with them. He gives them the spyglass because apparently, whatever her name is, I'm going to remember at some point, but not right now. The woman that was helping the Baudelaires at first told them she'd go get the spyglass back for them. So she sends it back because apparently we saw that scene on the ship where she got it back from Count Olaf. So they get it just as the Quagmires are sitting on the other side of the bench holding the other half of their parents' spyglass. So, like I said, very interesting to see the two parallel stories kind of converge right here. And so now they're obviously going to meet. But I love some of the little things. First of all, we see, the professor playing the violin in the background, which I can't really remember much about this professor. It's hard for me because I want to remember so bad. Like, I want to remember what the book was about. But to be honest, I can't remember what this professor was like, but I just remember there being a professor that was like the main character, pretty much took the place of the caretaker in this book. But he's in there playing the violin, and all of a sudden it like zooms in, and it shows a picture, and there's Lemony Snicket and Count Olaf standing side by side in the picture. I'm like, So clearly they're drawing more connections here. And then it ends on probably the best way to end this first season that's been full of grim tones, but also kind of quirky undertones as well. Well, sometimes not so undertone. But Lemony Snicket's just standing on a hill overlooking the school, and all of a sudden breaks into song and just starts singing this song about how this, you would think this tale would be full of joy and happiness, but that's not how the story goes. And he's singing, and all of a sudden Count Olaf's singing, and the Baudelaires are singing, and Mr. Poe joins in, and they're all just singing together about that's not how the story goes. It's the perfect way to end off the season. It was, I'm watching it, and I couldn't help but just smile, despite the fact that it is a very unfortunate story. There is no joy to be found here, but they do such a good job of portraying just the tone of the book. The kind of quirky yet grim tones of the book are perfectly represented in that final scene. It's the perfect way to end the season. I mean, you think about the theme song in every single episode, just the look away, look away. That little song fits in so well with the rest of the episode. So to end it on this little song, it fits so well. And I can't even describe just how it works, but I can tell you it worked. It worked so well, and I loved it. I was giggling and smiling, and probably shouldn't have been because it is a sad tale, but that's kind of the point. It's supposed to be, this is sad, this is grim, and yet you're kind of enjoying it. You're kind of liking it, which shouldn't say anything about you. If you enjoy it, it doesn't say anything bad about you. It's just more how it's being presented. So, but long story short, let me make sure I didn't miss anything in this episode. I will say the Lemony Snicket scenes in the past 2 episodes, I didn't really talk about in the last one. The Lemony Snicket scenes are just getting better and better. Like, there's so many good jokes being made whenever he's on screen. I love anytime he ever pops up, I'm just like, yes, more Lemony Snicket. The moment where he's in the hotel room and he's talking about, how if he were to leave the letter from his dearest outside his door, looking at it every day, it would be like reading the same thing every day, like she was constantly saying it to him. And he opens up his door, and there's the letter just sitting outside, and closes it. And he never comments on anything. He brings it up, shows it to us, and then doesn't say anything else. Just continues his little narration. His scenes are just, this entire season really, that just made the show for me. The rest of it is really enjoyable. The story was well done. The acting was pretty good. And, the music was great. The sets were great. But the one thing that made this show click was Lemony Snicket. Patrick Warburton as Lemony Snicket. First of all, you wouldn't think the ideal casting choice. Lemony Snicket, you're not really sure what type of character he is. Just from the books, you can tell he's got a dry sense of humor. So, yeah, Patrick Warburton, most of the time you can see that dry sense of humor in his tone. But just whenever I thought about it, I'm like, he may be okay. I never really thought like, oh yeah, Patrick Warburton as Lemony Snicket, that's a perfect casting. But as the season went along, he was the best person in that role. Like, he has brought this show together from, oh yeah, this would be a good show without him. But with him, it just made it so much better. It really brought together the tone and feel of the book. And honestly, even the movie knew to do that. You have to have Lemony Snicket in there. Because honestly, in the books, he was involved. He wasn't involved in the story going on. But he was such a part of the telling of the story. He was adding his own details, just like Patrick Warburton does. All of it he was so involved in the telling of the story and the narration and all of it. It's hard to do any sort of adaptation of the story in general without having Lemony Snicket involved. You have to. You ask anybody who read the books, they would tell you the same thing. You have to have him involved, because if you just showed us a movie about Violet, Klaus, and Sunny, it would be okay. It would be average. It would be kind of sad, but also kind of quirky. So you'd have some funny scenes here and there, some good storytelling elements, sure, but no Lemony Snicket, and it would take away such a big element of the story. So I'm glad they left it in there. I'm glad they did such a good job of portraying it. All in all, the season was a great start. I love where they're going with it. There are 13 books in all. plus some books on the outside that kind of fill in the gaps. I wonder if some of the scenes with the VFD organization that we've been seeing, I'm wondering how much of that has been drawn from those books, because I never actually got to read them. I just read the main 13 books and that was it. So I wonder how many of these scenes actually did happen in like if there was a side book that was written that I never got to see that talked about some of this stuff. I'd love to know. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'd love to figure out if that's actually what's happening or if they're just making up their little side story going along. But they're 4 books in, they're 13 books in all, and they keep getting bigger. So you could stretch it out into where now one book takes 3 episodes or something along those lines. I talked about this before. And I would love to see them do that. I'd love to see them take season 2 to sort of expand on the story, but spend a lot more time in certain places. Not just go flying through some of these books. I want them to actually spend some time really developing some of these stories. Because honestly, once the Quagmires get introduced, that's kind of where things started really getting rolling. And it's just like, okay, by the time you get to the Miserable Mill, you're already kind of invested. The Wide Window really was a good one that was like, okay, yeah, now I want to know what's going to happen next. Miserable Mill is like, this is good. Austere Academy, probably the one that really got me hooked. If I remember right, it's the one that was just like, yes, this is good. This is a good book series, and Quagmires had a lot to do with that. So I'm hoping this introduction of them now into the series, season 2 can pick up on their story, and now the Baudelaires and them are going to become friends, and I hope that they don't become, semi-main characters. I wouldn't mind if maybe they showed us kind of like what they did with their parents this season. They showed us like little scenes of what they were going through. So whenever the Baudelaires see them later down the road, it's like, oh, so that's how they got there. But I don't want them to be like, oh, let's just leave the Quagmires in. Even though in the books they were nowhere to be seen until like later episodes, let's just leave them in there. I really hope they don't do that, because it would just kind of take some of the... There were certain special moments that I remember in the book, and one of them was whenever certain characters would just pop up out of nowhere almost. You'd be like, oh, so that's interesting. I loved whenever they did that, whenever they bring up a random character from an older book that you're just like, hey, I remember that character. So if the Quagmires were to pop up and just stay in the story, it would feel a little bit less special whenever we get to see them later on. But like I said, if they want to show how they get there with the little clips like they were doing with their parents, that would probably work out okay. It wouldn't be too bad. It wouldn't feel like, oh, we see them all the time. It would just be like, oh yeah, we see them a couple minutes, but now they're involved. So, very interested to see what they're going to do with season 2, but as far as season 1 goes, it was really good. I think the best episode for me probably has to be this last one, just because of how well they sort of tie everything together. They leave it off on a very good note, and just the storytelling got better as the season went along. It was like, obviously they probably had the story planned from the beginning, so it wasn't like some of this stuff they just threw in at the end. But for the most part, I mean, it felt like that's what was going on. Like the first episode, oh yeah, storytelling's pretty good. Second got better, third got better, fourth got better, and then just kept on rolling, and then finally you see a lot of that was planned from the beginning and just led into these final episodes. And so it was really, really well done there. The kids playing Klaus and Violet doing a very good job so far. They have their moments where they sound very monotone, but most of the time that's whenever they're talking about inventions or talking about books or talking about, spouting exposition. Oh, this man is Count Olaf. Trying to explain to the adults what's going on with the adults not listening to them. But they've also had their scenes that show they know how to act. They've had their touching moments where you see them just together, and they're a great brother and sister combo. They work so well together. So they've had their moments of monotone, but they've also had great moments of emotion. Neil Patrick Harris, wasn't sure how I was going to feel about him as Count Olaf. I do like him as an actor, but I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to feel about him as the iconic Count Olaf. Jim Carrey's version was so goofy and out there. And honestly, he kind of played it the same way, which it does sort of make sense considering Count Olaf as an actor. But what I liked about it is we got to see a little bit more of the clever side of Count Olaf this season. In the movie, it was all about how funny can Jim Carrey act, how goofy can he make his expressions. and it almost made him look like a dunce, like he didn't know what he was doing. In this show, we've seen time and time again, Count Olaf does have a certain, there are times where he's kind of an idiot, and in the books he is thwarted by kids, so it does make sense that he's not the smartest man alive. But I mean, he's still smart. He still has a plan. He still hatches plans. He's still clever at times. I think the best example of that is, we saw in the first episode how Klaus and Violet came up with a plan of what to do to escape, and then Count Olaf figured out their plan and took Sunny and put her in a cage to keep them from trying to enact any plan if possible. But then we also see his goofy side, like in this one where Violet's telling Klaus, back up the saw. Olaf's just like, move forward the saw, back up the saw, move forward the saw. And then in steps Dr. Orwell. Klaus, or Lucky Boy, would you not listen to your sister? It's just like, oh, why didn't you think of that, boss? He's like, shut up. But I love kind of how he portrayed his character. I liked how he managed to show both sides of him, show the goofy side, but also show how he can be clever at times. Side characters, pretty good. Mr. Poe, he's had his moments where it's just kind of like, yeah, this is the goofy Mr. Poe I know. And then on top of that, some of these side characters, the hench people are interesting enough on their own. The people, the caretakers that have been popping up are very interesting to see. All of it's just been really fun to watch. Just watching them go through this and experience it. It's a great setup, and I hope, like I said, I hope season 2 can bring us more of this, because that's how I should feel, right? That's how I should feel at the end of all this. Is I want more. It shouldn't feel like, oh, I hope they do something different. I hope they change this, and I hope they change this. I want them to keep doing what they're doing, because they've shown this season they know what they're doing. They know how to handle the material with respect. The Uber joke aside, they know what they're doing, and they know their source material. No, they know their adaptation. They know what they're doing with it, and they know the tone to keep. And so I want to see more of this. I want to see another 2-3 seasons, however long it takes to finish all the way through the 13 books. I want to see this. Because it's such a good show. It is such a good show. And it's not often you can say that whenever a show takes on the adaptation of a book. Especially a book such like Series of Unfortunate Events. I mean, it's hard to think about doing a show on that. Or a movie on that. And honestly, I think the show's really captured it to a T, but also made enough changes to where it's their own thing, and they've taken it and said, okay, we're not going to do exactly like what the book does because we want to add our own little spin. And it's a spin that it's not necessarily for me, but I can see how other people might enjoy it, and I can see how kids would enjoy it too. So, all in all, great first season. Hope the second season comes out soon because I want to get into it, but for now, that's it for me. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. What did you like and dislike about this episode and season? Let me know. We can talk about and discuss all that good stuff. Leave a like and subscribe for future series of Unfortunate Events, and I'll see you at the next one.